So what to make of that first reading? Very strange reading in the Word this evening about God and Abraham and the animals cut in half. What's the meaning of that? Well, brothers and sisters, that is the rite of treaty making that ancient kings participated in. When one king wanted to make peace with another, he would invite him, and there would be an animal, a large animal, that would be cut in half. And the two halves of the animal would be separated. And the king who was making peace with the other one would walk down the middle of those halves of the animal. And the message was this: the king would be saying, if I don't keep my word, may that happen to me. Now that's what was going on between God and Abraham in the Word this evening. God had promised Abraham that his descendants would be like the stars of heaven. But Abraham wasn't quite sure. And so God said, all right, bring the animals. And Abraham did. And they cut those animals right in half. And they separated the halves. And Abraham began to feel a heaviness, a sleep, and he went into a kind of trance. And he saw, passing between the two halves of the animal, a pot of fiery smoke and a flaming torch. And Abraham knew that it was God. And Abraham knew ever since then that he could trust God. In this experience, God was convincing Abraham to believe in him. How has God convinced you to believe in him? All of us live our lives day by day, and sometimes there are some wonderful experiences we have, like falling in love. Gives us a high. Or having some really good fortune. We sail in our spirits. It's a kind of trance, isn't it? When very good things happen to us. But there are other kinds of things that happen too. Bad things, dark things. Like, for example, you lose your health, or somebody you love dies. Maybe you're one of those persons who in our days is suffering from economic insecurity. Perhaps you lost your job. Maybe there's been a breakdown in your marriage, something you thought would never, ever happen. And of course, there are all the great disappointments of life. These are dark, low experiences for us. When they happen, we kind of go into a trance, lots of questions, Do I believe? Why should I believe? What do I believe anymore? And all of these experiences, God can use as occasions to convince us to trust him. Now that's what was happening on Mount Tabor in the gospel reading today. The 3 disciples went with Jesus up the mountain to pray. Now, they've been doing this a lot. Jesus prayed all the time. So going up the mountain to pray was nothing to them. They went up to the mountain with him to pray. But while they were up there this time, Peter and James and John began to fall asleep, a deep sleep, kind of like a trance. And suddenly, they were awakened and they saw Jesus. This was a Jesus that they had eaten with, they had spoken with, worked with, lived with. This Jesus, his face shone like the sun, and his clothes were dazzlingly white. They saw his glory. And with him was Moses and Elijah, the 2 most important people in the Old Testament, and they were speaking with Jesus. Then came the cloud, and out of the cloud a voice, and the voice said, "This is my beloved Son. Listen to him." You see, in this experience up there on the mountain, Jesus was convincing his disciples to believe in him. I'd like to tell you a story about what faith is like. A number of years ago, I was on a pastoral visit to the wilds of New Guinea, the rainforests of New Guinea. I was in a very small plane, 1-engine plane. It was me and the pilot. We had taken off from the southern side of the island to go to the northern side of the island. And in order to do that, we had to pass through some pretty rugged mountains. As a matter of fact, there was one passage that was very, very frightening. 2 walls of stone, very, very narrow passage. And because this little plane couldn't fly high enough over the mountains, it had to pass through them. Just as we were getting close to the pass, it started to cloud up. It was so cloudy that visibility was 0. And so the pilot started to circle, and I started to pray. And the pilot circled and circled and circled for almost an hour, saying nothing. And I was praying. And then all of a sudden, boom! The pilot saw a small opening of light. I didn't. I wanted out of that plane. But he saw that small opening of light, and he turned that plane toward it, and he passed through it, and we came out into bright sunlight. I put myself in the hands of that Pilate. Now that's what faith is like. That's what the experience of faith is like. That's what faith in Jesus Christ is like. You see, we all have our experiences in life. We all live our days. Sometimes, because of the kinds of things that we're living, we go into a kind of a little trance. And then we have to make a decision. Will I trust God or not? And if I decide to trust God, then I come to live in clear light. Faith. Now, brothers and sisters, being convinced about God and trusting ourselves to God is not the end of the faith story. Our second reading today suggests that you and I, as believers, as men and women and children who have opened out to God, yielded to God, trust in God in our lives, that we who are believers become pilots for the others. Our brothers and sisters who live with us in the world, some of them, Paul says this evening, live as enemies of the cross of Jesus. That is to say, they don't get it. No idea. They live their lives going in their circles. They follow directions that sometimes are destructive of themselves. They're confronted with all of life and feel lost. But you and I, as believers, we are like pilots to them. We can help them get convinced to trust God. That's our mission, isn't it? That's what it means to be a believing Catholic Christian in our world. That's what it means to be pilots for the other brothers and sisters. This week we're going to be having the parish mission. The parish mission is all about faith. How do I get to believe? What is it like to believe? And how do I fit it together with everything else I know? How do I make sense about God, my life? How do I put it all together? And then, what does it mean to be a believer living in this world today, where I am? What does it mean to believe? On Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in the morning after the Mass, there will be a conference. The same conference will be repeated each of those days at 7 in the evening. If you are curious about faith, I invite you to attend. God bless you. profess our faith. I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all that is seen, visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made. For us men and for our salvation he came down from heaven.